This is episode 79 of the Why Not Me podcast, Holding Space. I'm your host, Danita Bremer. I'm a wife, mom, member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and a life coach. And in this podcast, we talk about how to overcome our inner obstacles to endure this life well. Okay, so first of all, I had somebody just reach out to me with a suggestion. I thought it was fabulous. So instead of encouraging you to just leave a review, I'm going to tell you how to do that. So if you open your podcast app, and I have an iPhone, so this is how you do it on an iPhone. I'm assuming it's fairly similar on an Android. Open your podcast app, go to your library, and then click on the podcast that you would like to leave a review for. So, of course, it's the Why Not Me podcast. And of course, you have subscribed to it, right? But if you haven't, you can go to search and put in the Why Not Me podcast. And it's the only one with that name. So once that podcast is open, you will scroll down past the episodes down to where it says ratings and reviews. And you right below that, the ratings and reviews, you'll see these 5 stars. You can click on them. And then below where it says tap to rate, it might bring up one of the ratings or one of the reviews. There's a little purple write a review. So you can click on that, and then it'll give you an opportunity to tap the star rating and put a title in and a body of your review. And then you just click the top right corner, you click send. So it is not difficult. It's pretty easy. It only takes a minute or two. And I would so appreciate it if you enjoy this podcast, if it has made you think differently about yourself or others or God. That's always what I say. That's my intention. And I would just love for you to tell me what your favorite takeaway is. Okay, so last week we talked about making space, what space is in this context, and how it keeps us from being so reactive, which many of us are. And today we're going to talk about holding space. Now, holding space can be done for yourself, but usually we think of it in context of holding space for someone else. So that's mostly what I'm going to be talking about here. But just know that you can hold space for yourself as well. You can apply these same principles and ideas to yourself. So, of course, first of all, what is holding space? It is being mentally, emotionally, physically present with someone else's experience so that they feel safe to process their own experience. Okay, so safety is a really big factor here. I want you to think about the difference between somebody that is doing some of these things, but you don't feel safe with them. That would not be holding space. That would just be them witnessing or, seeing. So there's kind of an added level here of it's not just someone going through these actions, but for the purpose of creating safety for you, right? Or I often think of this in terms of parenting, holding space for our children, holding space for our spouse, those kinds of things. So I wanted to talk about a couple of analogies here so that as I go throughout this episode, you can think of these analogies. The first one is, I don't know about you, but when I was in elementary school, every once in a while, the PE teacher would bring out the big tent, and it had like different colors, but it was this big round piece of nylon, right? And so all the kids, and I think in my PE classes, there was usually like 30 or 40 of us in PE at the same time. We would all get around this giant round piece of fabric, and we would hold on to the edge of it, and we would flip it up and down, right? And then a few of the kids would get to go under the middle of it, right? So they would crawl under the middle of it, and the rest of the kids would hold on, and then we would make this big bubble around ourselves. We would hold it around ourselves, and it would just be like this tent, this bubble around us. And of course, as a young child, it was like magical, right? It was like, oh, this is so cool. But if you think about it, if everyone around the perimeter of that tent were to let go of it, it would just fall down to the floor, right? The same idea with a kite. When we fly a kite, The wind lifts the kite up, but it's a requirement that there's somebody on the earth holding the string. And if you let go of the string, the kite will come down. So it's this kind of paradox that we hold, right? That there has to be an anchor in order for the kite to fly. That is kind of what I think of when I think of holding space. It's somebody that anchors us, or multiple somebodies who create this safe container, so to speak, around us so that we can have this bubble or this tent to feel safe and emotionally be able to work through whatever we have going on. There's one other example that I want to bring up here. When one of my daughters was a toddler, she was the kind of kid that once she got upset, she didn't get upset very often, but once she did, it was like a train that was going full speed and was not going to end until it ran out of steam, right? So we would try to kind of head her off, but every once in a while, she would just need to cry and scream and throw a fit. Sometimes when she did this, I would hold her in my lap and like squeeze her into this tight hug because she needed that tight space. It like made her feel safe, and she could still kick and scream and push against me, but it would make her get through that crying, that fit, whatever it was she was upset about, a little bit faster. It would help her to have that support around her and help her feel safe. Not that it, stopped her fit, but it helped her to feel safe. And sometimes she would come out of it a little bit faster. Now, my other daughter, she would not respond well to that at all. She would need wide open spaces to just like go be by herself. That's how she felt more safe. So as we go through these examples and these concepts, I want you to think about what makes you feel safe, right? When somebody else is there, when you're going through a thing, when you have some emotions going on and you feel safe with a person, is it because they allow you a lot of space, or is it because they get up close and personal? And some of this is some trial and error on figuring out what makes another person feel safe. What from our point of view, if we're the ones holding space, do we step back and give them more space, or do we lean forward? Do we hold their hand? Do we put our hands on their shoulders and ground them? Each person, it's going to be different what feels safe to them, but that's a really big element in holding space. And as a practitioner, as a life coach, of course, I'm not physically with my clients most of the time. I do most of my coaching over Zoom. So when we talk about holding space, it's this very metaphoric, this like shared emotional space between us or mental space between us. It is also physical, but it's more about like, do I jump in to offer? Do I stand back? Do I let them change the subject or not? That kind of thing, right? So as the practitioner, as the life coach, I am watching for their cues and for what makes them calm down, what makes them do the opposite of calm down, right? What agitates them perhaps. And what do they need to fill space? What do they need to be able to process? That's really what I think of when I think of this definition of being mentally, emotionally, and physically present with someone else's experience so that they feel safe to process through it, right? It's not that I am processing the experience for them. I'm just creating this container where they can process it. And for so many of us, we have very few places where we feel like we can process emotions and experiences without somebody trying to fix it or judging it, those kinds of things. And actually, I lied, one more little kind of visual aid for you here. I want you to think of an elementary school right next to a highway, and there's no fence, right? Most likely, the teachers are going to try to keep the kids very close to the building, if that's the case, right? Or maybe even on the other side of the building. We don't play between the school building and the highway, right? Now imagine that a really strong, tall fence goes up right along the highway and it gives that school a yard, right? A space between the school and the highway that is safe, that the kids can go all the way to the fence. As long as they don't climb over the fence, they're perfectly safe, right? It creates a safe zone, right? So sometimes when we talk about holding space, I think it's related to this idea of putting up boundaries, because boundaries tell us where the edges of our safety are. Okay. So when we think about holding space for another person, we have some metaphoric boundaries, right? So just think about that. But the space is the space where we feel safe. And if there isn't a boundary, then oftentimes we feel safe only in a smaller space. And once we put up a boundary, we can feel safe in a bigger space. It just felt like that was kind of appropriate. I'm not sure that the whole boundary thing is going to come in today's episode, but for me, it helps me conceptualize this idea of space and holding space. Essentially, the space holder is the boundary. That is what you're doing. You're giving your whoever, your spouse or your kid or your friend, whoever it is, you're giving them a boundary. You're like, here, I am your boundary. I will be your protector. And that's what safety is, right? It's a state of being protected, essentially. And so as the space holders, we are the boundary keepers. We're the ones that's not going to let anything in or out that would make it unsafe. Okay. So there are some elements here of what it is required to hold space. The first one is that you allow the other person to get some emotional resolution. Oftentimes, when we're talking about holding space, we're specifically referring to giving a person space and time to wrestle with or to be with their emotions so that they can process through them, so that they can get some resolution, right? It's a space where, first of all, it's okay to feel whatever you're feeling, right? And sometimes we need to do that. We need to say, your feelings are okay. Your feelings are valid. And often as parents or spouses or just humans in the world, we send the opposite message. As we're just being humans, oftentimes we do tell people it's not okay to feel this way. What happens when your kid cries? Do you tell them, don't cry, it'll be okay? Now, it's not your intention to make them think that feeling sad or feeling hurt is not an okay thing to do. But that's often what we do because we empathize and we know how uncomfortable it is to feel sad. I'm just going to use that emotion as the example. And we want to be like, oh, I don't want you to feel sad. I know how uncomfortable this is. Don't feel sad here. Let's go get some ice cream. Let's do this. Let's play a game, right? And so we subconsciously send this message that it's not okay to feel this way. And what we're seeing kind of as a collective here is that we're learning how to let other people have their emotions and not tell them it's not okay, consciously or subconsciously, right? So this holding space is very much like, can you let the other person be with their emotions and not try to take their emotions away, not try to distract them from their emotions, not try to fix their emotions, right? One of my mentors, Brooke Snow, has a fabulous episode on this. If you go to the Brooke Snow podcast and you look for one called Holding Space, she talks specifically in that episode about kind of the science behind emotional resonance. So it's kind of interesting, but I do think that that episode doesn't encompass everything that it really means to hold space. It's not just about allowing somebody to have their emotions or to hold your own emotion in a positive way or a neutral way so that the other person can match you. That's not really what the intention is, I don't think, of holding space. I think it's to let that person have their emotion, not try to make them match your emotion, but give them kind of this metaphoric container of like, here's a safe place where you can just have your emotion. So I talked about safety and the condition of being protected. One kind of big element here of holding space is this idea of witnessing somebody else's experience, witnessing their emotions, and not wanting anything in return, and witnessing for the purpose of understanding, not just witnessing to witness. So, like, if you were to get in a car accident and there were people that witnessed the accident, they might pull over, right, and give their report to the police or whatever. They're not there necessarily to help you make sense of your experience. And so that would not necessarily be holding space. Now, if they come up to you and they say, "Hey, are you okay? Is there anything I can do to help you right now? Do you need some support?" That might be a little closer to what we're talking about with this space holding idea. It's being the witness and not wanting anything in return. One of the things that humans desire is to be seen and heard for who we are authentically. And so having somebody else witness how you feel and what you're thinking and what you're experiencing without judgment, and that's the next thing we're going to talk about, this non-judgment, without wanting a return and without like trying to fix things, that's like a sacred space there, right? I mean, that's essentially what the Lord does for us. He understands our pain, he empathizes, he has compassion, but he doesn't want anything in return. He's not judging us for it, right? It's like this skill set that it comes to some people fairly naturally, and other people have to really work at having that, right? So let's talk about this element of non-judgment. I put this sort of under the subheading of safety because I think this is one of the main things that makes a person or a place safe. No judgment. It's when we don't make that other person's actions or words or feelings or experience in any way mean something about ourselves. We stay grounded in who we are, right? Another element of this non-judgment is not knowing what is right or wrong for someone else. It's so human of us to want to be like, well, have you tried this? Have you thought of that? But I'm so sorry, I don't actually know what you need to do here. And of course, we can give each other options, right? I'm not saying to not give someone options, but if the feeling behind it is, here are some options so that you can take some action and fix this, that's different than, I actually don't know what's right for you or what's wrong for you in this situation. Here's some ideas that are coming up for me. What do you think about them? Right? So it's kind of hard to stay in that place of not knowing what is right for someone or what is wrong for someone. An example that comes to my mind is when somebody leaves the church. We're often pretty quick to be like, oh, that's the wrong thing. They're not staying on the covenant path, right? Except that some people's path takes them away from the gospel and it takes them away from God. And that's the very thing they need to know that they want to be with God, right? It's kind of the dead end path that makes things very clear for them. That has been my experience, actually. So I'm so slow to try to figure out what is wrong or right for someone. And here's the thing is that it's not black and white, right? Everybody has different personality traits and emotions and experiences. I just can't claim to know what is right for everyone. I mean, I can't even claim to know what meal plan is right for everyone, much less spiritual plan, right? But it's a kind of a rare thing for humans to be in that space of like, actually, all I can do is make decisions for me, and I don't know what's right or wrong for you. So I kind of think of this as as the space holders, we stay grounded in our purpose and we don't try to push that onto the other person. And then the last thing that I've mentioned a couple of times under this sort of idea of non-judgment is not trying to solve the other person's problem. It's the deep listening to understand and not to try to solve, right? And this is hard. This is really hard for me too. As humans, we default to empathy and compassion, I think, unless we have some deep wounds that keep us from doing that. And so we when we empathize with somebody's pain, we're like, I get it. And I'm assuming you want to get out of it. And this is what I would do. But oftentimes, the very thing that someone really needs is to just not try to solve it, at least yet. Right. And this is really hard for us parents, right? Like we have more life experience and more wisdom than our children do. But sometimes our kids just want to be in the problem and they want to in fact, it's almost like a process that we can go through to just let the pain be there in order to process through it. Right. So just as a recap here, holding space is really being present is what it is, being present with another person and giving them time and space to process their emotions or their experience and giving them the safety to do so, not judging them, not knowing what's right or wrong, not trying to solve their problems, just witnessing for the purpose of listening and understanding and not wanting anything in return. Now, it's so easy for me to sit here and talk about this, right? And offer this as like, oh yeah, go do that. It's so easy. But this is a really hard skill to develop. And it's because we all are wounded in some way. We all have these wounds. I think that's just the best word, where our past has, hurt us. And when we see somebody else going through that similar emotion or a similar experience, it brings that same thing up in us. And when that is triggered, this kind of goes back to last week's episode of making space, then we tend to react instead of just hold it there. Now we can, like I mentioned at the beginning, we can hold space for ourselves. We can give ourselves space and time and non-judgment and not try to rush and solve all the problems, to just be with our own experiences and be with our own emotions. I will say I have found this to be tricky. It's much easier to do it with someone else, to allow someone else to hold space for you, because this is how I think of it. When you're holding space, there's a part, like when you're holding space for yourself, there's a part of your brain that's like the space holder. And then there's the part of the brain that's the feeler and then just let everything be there. Right. And so you kind of have to switch back and forth between these two parts. And that can be a little bit tricky. I find it's easier to do that if I journal it out. So with like one color pen, I will write down everything like my human self is feeling, like this happened and that happened. And this is what I think, and this is how I feel. And then with a different color pen, I'll kind of play the part of the coach or the space holder and ask the questions. And then I'll go back and forth, but it takes a lot longer. It can feel a little clunky at times. I can notice, and I'm pretty practiced at this because I coach myself nearly every day. I notice when I want to go up into my logical brain instead of just the human part of me is just supposed to be there in the emotions, in the experience. So it is a little trickier to do it for yourself. I would say the easiest practice to do for yourself is noticing what comes up for you, noticing how you feel, noticing where you feel it, and then just letting that be there. instead of trying to like, oh, well, maybe we can fix it. Maybe we can do this. Maybe we can do that. Like holding off on that part and just like being with it, like slowing everything down and being with it. And honestly, like the last year, that has been what I've learned is that I need to slow down and I need to be with myself and I need to just give myself so much time and space to just be with what is. And it's kind of countercultural, right? It's not something that comes easily in our culture that's so focused on productivity and create this and do this and, all that kind of thing. So it is something that can be done. I will say, when I first got certified as a coach, I was sitting in a sacrament meeting and I'm a crier in sacrament meeting. One of the ways I know that I'm feeling the spirit is that I cry. And I wasn't crying at all for like several weeks at a time. And I thought, I wonder what's happening here. And it was almost like I took holding space for myself too far. And I didn't allow myself to have those human emotions. And as soon as I noticed that, then I was able to kind of switch and allow myself to still be myself. But I was like in this space of like, I have to always be watching my thoughts and my feelings and like always be holding space. And I will say it takes a little bit extra energy to hold space. That being really present can take more energy. So I kind of like loosened up my energy and then was like, yeah, I need to like not be in coach mode all the time. Right. I can let myself be human sometimes. So that's just a little warning to look out for. That's enough for now, and so are you. If you enjoyed this episode, would you please give it a review and tell me your favorite takeaway? And if you're ready to learn how to hold space, go to danitabremmer.com to schedule a free session with me. Until next time, go be you and follow the spirit.